Chris Ferris Show. Well, welcome to the Chris Ferris Show, where we take 15 minutes in a 15-minute podcast to talk about how do we become the healthiest versions of ourselves. We are excited about today's conversation because I think, like a lot of the conversations we have, this one is going to be relatable to all of us. We're going to talk today about how do we break generational curses. A lot of people argue that this is not a thing, and that's totally okay if you don't believe in generational curses. I get it. I just happen to believe, through research, things that we've seen, things that we've witnessed and experienced in our own lives, and also the lives of people that we work with all over this country, that there really are generational curses. Now, some people refer to them and call them different things. But the Bible does tell us in Exodus 25, God said, I will visit the iniquity of the fathers 3 and 4 generations to those who hate and despise me. We sort of take that passage to mean that there are these generational curses that are passed down from one generation to the next. And I think there's a couple factors that play into this. We're going to talk about both of them today. But I want to talk about the importance of how to break those curses, some steps that we can take to start breaking those curses and to change our family bloodline. And I want to just say this as a way of encouragement for all of us, is to realize and notice, to just step into the reality and the promise that you can break those generational curses, that you can break them and that you can move on, that you can change the course of this for your children and their children. And so I think that this conversation is an extremely important one to those who care about their bloodline and those who care about their legacy. Let's talk for a moment about these generational curses. There's two factors, there's two dynamics I believe that play into this. One is genetics and two is environment. Let's talk about the genetic side for a moment. There are lots of research and there's a lot of people, scientists, clinicians, psychologists, doctors who have done the research to and shown us that there are genetic codes, there is genetic imprinting from one generation to the next that sort of creates a predisposed behavior, oftentimes a predisposed personality trait or character trait that we have in our lives. And that character trait, that behavior, that personality trait, of course, predicated on somebody else who is a part of our gene pool, is a part of our genetics, right? I have worked with people who have never met their biological father, yet their mother tells them they have some of the exact same behaviors and patterns and traits and mannerisms as their father. So we know that there are genetic imprinting. There's genetic imprinting and there's genetic coding, and that's all part of our biology, right? And so that part can be a little bit more difficult sometimes to identify. That dynamic can be a little bit more difficult sometimes to even be able to address. But I think with some observation and some inventorying that we can. The second dynamic that plays into this would be environmental. It would be the environments in which we were raised, the environments that we grew up in, our social surroundings and our social settings. There is a school of thought in psychology. It is a matrix and it's a theory that is called the unfolding molding continuum. The unfolding molding continuum. And there's two extreme sides. The unfolding side is where the behaviorists rest. These are people, psychologists, psychiatrists, clinicians. These are those who believe that our biology is what it is. We are predisposed to be what we're going to be. Environments don't play a big role in changing that. It's a hardwiring for you. That's the hyper side of the unfolding part of that continuum. Then on the other side, the molding side, are those doctors and psychologists and clinicians who believe that environment really does play a big role. They're cognitive theorists. They believe that the environments play a huge role in how somebody turns out. The reason that I like this matrix and I love this continuum theory is because you don't have to rest on either the unfolding side or the molding side. You can find yourself somewhere in the middle, which is where I find myself to be. I do believe in genetic coding. I do believe in predispositions. I do believe that there are things that are a part of us. It's who we are, our personality traits, our character, and that is a big driver to the people that we are today. But environments play a huge, huge role in that. See, I happen to believe that fundamentally we are all flawed at birth. Fundamentally, at the time of birth, we are flawed individuals. And I believe that we are born into sin. I have a 3-year-old who is starting to understand life, and she's starting to be able to cognitively process more than one thought at a time in situations. And it's interesting. I'll catch her in doing something that she's not supposed to do, and I'll ask her, "Did you do that certain thing?" And her response is, "No, I didn't do it." Even though I know that she did, and she knows that she did, she lied to me and said that she didn't. I didn't teach her how to lie. It was it was part of her nature, that innate disconnect and brokenness inside, if you please. But environments are huge in this role, and here's why. Because I've watched in my own life, I'm watching in the life of my children, and the life of those that we work with on a regular basis, can point back to some of the things that they have today as way of behaviors, as way of patterns in their life that are destructive, that are dismantling to relationships. They can point back to environments that they grew up in and realize that a lot of the environments constructed these behaviors and these patterns inside of them. And so one of the things that we have to do is we have to be willing to inventory. We call it that sort of moral inventory, where we're going back and we're connecting the dots and we're finding the why, right? So we can't just say, well, that's just who I am. That's just who I'm wired to be. That's what I was born to be. I think that's a little bit disingenuous. Again, going back to that matrix and that continuum, I think the safe place for us to fall is in the middle. Yes, there are some predispositions. Yes, there's some genetic coding and imprinting on us, and it's a part of our character traits. But environments play a huge role in this. And one of the coolest and I think most profound passages, in fact, I think it's the most profound book in the Bible, but one of the most profound passages of Scripture is in Romans chapter 12, when Paul was writing to the church of Rome, and he said this, to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. Now, this transformation is not just a behavioral modification. You're not just shifting and modifying things. It's an actual transformation of the character. And he said the way that this is done is through the renewing of our minds. In other words, he's saying that there are some things that you were involved in, that you experienced, some things that circumstances that you walk through, things that you witnessed in your social environments or the social influencers, your moms, your dads, the people that you were around, that you witnessed that became a part of your construct. It helped to form and construct who you are today. Some of those things are not good. Some of those behaviors and those patterns are not healthy. In fact, they're the opposite. They're destructive. And so what do we have to do? We have to evaluate this. We have to go back and we have to identify these things so that we can take authority over them. So let me give you an example. If you grew up in a home, let's say with a mom and a dad, they stayed together, right? But there was a lot of dysfunctional behavior in the home. Let's say, for example, that the dad, your father, was extremely aggressive. And his way of getting the family to respond to him was through his aggressive behavior and his tone of his voice. And he hollered a lot and he threatened a lot, right? And there was just a lot of these sort of destructive emotional behaviors that he projected onto the family. Let's say that your mom was passive aggressive. Let's say that she didn't really hold him accountable or call him out for those behaviors. She was just passive aggressive in how she saw those things. Well, here's what's happening. As a child, and by the way, we're in this process from 0 to 15, maybe a little bit older. There's individual stages that we walk through in our own conscience construct and stages of development. Clearly don't have time to get into all of those. But what's happening is as you're being constructed, as you're being developed, the very first thing is what we call that stage or that moment of analyzation. You're analyzing it, right? It's an analyzation, and your conscience, your mind, you're trying to process those behaviors. We call that a cognitive assimilation. You're assimilating the situation, processing it, reconciling it in your conscience. But then there's another stage that you move into that's called the cognitive adaptation. You begin to adapt to the environment. You begin to become a part of the environment that you're being raised in. So That's why, as an adult, we carry these curses from one generation to the next. Not just the genetic coding, but also the environments that we're raised in, the environments that we're brought up in. Our consciences begin to be constructed and developed to do what? To behave and to act that way. And so the very thing, I find it interesting, the very thing that I hated about my parents or my father or my mother growing up, I became those things when I was a father, right? Or you became those things when you were a mother. What's happening? You're carrying that into the next generation. So there are some things that we have to do in order to break these generational curses. And I want to just go over them with you quickly. We've got 4 minutes to do it. And here is what there's 3 steps that you can take. First of all, you've got to identify your behavior or pattern that is destructive. Remember this, you might want to write this down. If it happens once, it's an accident. If it happens twice, it's a coincidence. But 3 or more times, you've got a pattern. And you've got to identify, is this pattern destructive? Is this a destructive pattern that I am carrying out? Is it hurting me, my kids, my wife, my husband, my relationships? What is the destructive behavior that has become a pattern? Identify it. We're stopping the blame. We're not pointing the finger of blame. We're taking the personal inventory. 2, provide an interruption. You have to provide an interruption. Now remember, nothing changes if nothing changes. Nothing changes until we interrupt what needs to change. How do we do this? What does this mean? Give me an example. Well, first of all, pause. Part of providing an interruption, we call it operating in the power of the pause. I'm going to pause and I'm going to harness in my emotions. I need to capture and harness in the emotions. The next thing I want to do is I want to take a moment to pray. Right? I want to ask God, Father, give me the strength and the power to take authority over this behavior, over this pattern. Give me the power and the strength to break this generational curse. This has been going on in my family for a long time. I want to be the legacy changer. I want to be the one who changes it in the course of our behaviors and patterns for my children. We're breaking the curse. You're asking for that power and for that to be manifested in you. And then the other part of that interruption is do something different. So if your propensity or if your first response in a reaction is anger, and that's the generational curse, do something different. Replace it with kind words. Intentionally, I'm going to speak kind words. Now, I've already paused and harnessed in my emotions. I've already taken time to pray. I'm in a position now where I can do something different. I can interject a different behavior, right? Because what are we doing? We're trying to replace the old behaviors and patterns with new ones. And so put something else in there. Do something different. All of this is a process for you being able to provide an interruption to that behavior, to that pattern. And then the third thing, after we're going to identify the behavior, we're going to provide the interruption, and then number 3 is real simple, just rinse and repeat. You're just going to do this over and over and over again. And I think that I've done this in my own life. I've walked hundreds and thousands of people to do this, to walk through this as well in their own life. And the results are incredible. We start to see God do some really supernatural works. Remember, when we're doing for ourselves what we can, God steps in and supernaturally does for us what we can't. God will do for you what you can't as long as you're doing for yourself what you can. I mean, that's just a fact. And so I want to encourage you and challenge you to take these points today, to walk them out, to carry them out, to do something different in your own life, as opposed to just continuing to do the same old thing over and over again and hoping that it changes. I said it a minute ago on the show. I'm going to say it again. Nothing changes if nothing changes. Nothing changes until we interrupt what needs to change. Are you going to break those generational curses? Are you going to change that family bloodline? Well, that responsibility is on you. Stop pointing the fingers and expecting somebody else to do it. Take the lead today in your own life and ask God to give you the authority in your own life to do it. And I promise you, He will answer that prayer, and you will see that transition and change happen for your family. Hope this helps, guys, and hope this brings hope and change to your life. It was awesome being with you guys today. Can't wait to be with you again. God bless.